Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. I dragged my ass to the laundry room on a typical gray Sunday morning at 7. I had no idea if the day outside was gray, but I think everyone feels that way when they're in the laundry room on a Sunday morning. I've only been using the laundry service for the last year or so. Before that, my wife washed our clothes in our own laundry room in the basement of our house. I moved in about a year ago, and 6 months ago, my wife became my ex-wife, and the laundry was now in my former house. So I made a new habit of going to the laundry early on Sunday morning, located a mile from my apartment. Although I don't really like getting up early and doing laundry, I didn't want this ritual to disrupt my weekends, so I came to the laundry early and left early. I avoided the hassle of waiting for a car on a busy day and possibly having to engage in polite conversation with other visitors. After all, isn't Sunday morning meant for a hangover and a quiet reading of the newspaper? I've been going to the same laundromat for the last 9 months or so, and maybe I've seen her before, but I've never paid attention to her. But this time it was different. One of the wheels of the cart she was pulling seemed to be a little bent, which caused the cart to roll unsteadily. She was covered in dirty clothes, and it was difficult for her to roll it with one hand and try to hold the door open with the other. I saw this while looking through a sports newspaper, and being in general a good guy, I put the newspaper down, went to the door and held it like a gentleman while she dragged the cart inside. She looked up at me and gave me a 100-megawatt smile, with beautiful white teeth and big brown eyes. "Thanks, mister," she said, heading for the row of washing machines on the far side of the laundry room. I thought she was about 7, 8 years old. She was of mixed race or perhaps Hispanic descent, with a shock of long, curly brown hair. She was simply charming. I turned around, expecting to see my parents walking behind me, but they weren't there. Now I was worried and intrigued. I watched a child load an entire stack of clothes into the washing machine, without separating colored things from white ones as I was taught. Then she put some washing powder that she was carrying with her in the cart, put the money in the car, and pressed the start button. She took a small teddy bear out of her bag, sat down on a chair, and began talking to it quietly while the washing machine was doing its job. From my seat, almost on the other side of the laundry room, I could see that the clothes she was wearing, jeans, a long-sleeved shirt, and a pink jacket, too light for a 6.5-degree morning, had seen better days. Although they weren't dirty, they were faded from age and wear. She looked one step better than a street bum, but there was a calmness in her demeanor that simply did not fit into my head. I also couldn't believe that parents would send such a small child alone to wash family clothes. Being a parent myself, I just knew there was something wrong with the whole thing, which brought me back to my own business. My children, at this very moment, were probably sleeping, sheltered in their warm, comfortable beds in my former home. When they wake up, maybe in an hour or two, their mother, my ex-wife, will most likely cook them a hot breakfast of pancakes and eggs, and maybe bacon. My 13-year-old son, Ethan, is a big fan of bacon, and my 15-year-old daughter, Haley, prefers pancakes. My favorite dish was waffles, but those days of happy Sunday morning breakfasts with my family became fast-fading memories. As it should be in a divorce, my wife received custody of the children, and although I received some visitation rights, my wife, with all her disgust, turned the children against me, blaming my selfishness for the destruction of our family. My kids didn't want anything to do with me, and that was pretty obvious the few times we were together. My crime, not sitting still while my wife was making me horny with another man, during a long weekend trip with 3 other couples and the man she eventually made love to, a rich guy who made it a rule to make love to other men's wives. She and he developed this plan to make love for one night, and then she would come back to me and be completely faithful to me for the rest of our lives, as it was before the weekend. Since she had told me about it in advance, it was not cheating, she claimed. But in case I wanted to make a fuss, she would take half my money, half my things, the whole house, and, as luck would have it, spoil my relationship with the children, which, of course, would go to her. When I refused, she got everything she promised, and, of course, shifted the blame onto me. The kids bought into it. I was totally fucked. Thinking about those family breakfasts made me feel hungry, as I hadn't eaten anything since the last sausage slipped down my throat, along with a Mickey's malt beer at the bar where I was sitting watching the Knicks game. There was a bad imitation of a vending machine on one wall, with a Coke machine next to it. I was sure that whoever owns the laundry collects money from both machines every day, Otherwise, they would have been hacked and ruined long ago. I bought a pack of M&Ms and a Diet Coke. Just as I was taking out a can of Coke, I looked at the little girl. She seemed to be quietly watching me, but then I realized that she was not looking at me, but at my snacks. Like I said, I'm someone's father, and the look on her face when she looked at my snacks hurt my heart. I walked over to where she was sitting and quietly asked if she wanted my Diet Coke and M&Ms. She brightened noticeably and sat down directly on her chair. Then a sad expression appeared on her face, and she refused my offer. "Mom says I shouldn't take food from strangers, especially men," she explained. "That's a very good rule, honey, and you should always listen to what your mom says." I agreed. "I'll tell you what. I'll just put the soda and M&Ms on the chair next to you, and you can take them if you want. I'll take another one and go back to my place." I put the food down, went back to the vending machines and bought myself another Diet Coke and another bag of M&Ms. Then I returned to my seat and picked up the newspaper, surreptitiously watching her from above. After about 5 minutes, she picked up a soda and an M&Ms and got down to business. I smiled to myself. I left after about 90 minutes, folding my 2 bags and putting them in the car. When I left, I didn't think about the baby, immersed in my life and how I was going to spend the rest of Sunday. To be honest, I didn't think about the baby anymore until I went to the laundry the next Sunday, again around 7 a.m. Then I wondered if she would show up again. Of course, after about half an hour, she came to the door, dragging the cart piled with clothes behind her again. I held the door open for her again. She thanked me again and headed for the machines on the far wall. I noticed that she was wearing the same clothes as last week. I waited for her to start downloading, then carefully walked over and sat on the seat next to her. "I see you have a problem with the rear wheel on your cart, honey. Is it okay if I try to fix it?" She nodded affirmatively, playing with her teddy bear. I turned the cart over and saw that the rear right wheel was bent on the axle. I straightened it with my hands and then rolled the cart back and forth to check my work. "Instant repair of the wagon." My little friend looked impressed. "By the way, I'm Alex Rogers," I said, holding out my hand for a handshake. She held out her small hand with as much dignity as she could muster and said in a gloomy voice, "Maddie Ruiz, I'm very pleased to meet you, sir." "Well, now that we've introduced ourselves, we're not strangers anymore," I said. "What do you say about soda and sweets?" "Can I have a real Coke this week?" "What is it?" she asked, her eyes wide and questioning. "Of course. 1 real Coke for you, a Diet Coke for me, and some M&Ms for both of us." We sat and talked for almost 2 hours. I took a notebook and pen from the car and introduced her to the game of tic-tac-toe. It took her about 5 minutes to figure out what was going on, but then she started to get it right. I let her win a few times, just like I let my kids win sometimes. For a minute or two, I was immersed in my own little world, thinking about playing with my children. Then I fell into thinking about how my then-wife, Tracy, looking me straight in the face, said she was going to sleep with Robert Goldstein III, a lawyer from a big city, on the night my life as I knew it ended. "It's just one night, Alex. It won't mean anything." "What, are you kidding me? This will be the end of our marriage," I shouted back. "Don't be like that, Alex," she shouted back. "Don't throw away 18 years of marriage because of one night. I didn't sneak behind your back like I could. We could have done it and you might never have guessed. Just give it to me, Alex." Tracy took Robert's hand and went with him to his bedroom in a 4-room cottage. After standing with my mouth open for what seemed like several hours, but most likely only a minute, I took my things and left. "Alex, it's your turn now," Maddie said, bringing me back to the present. I marked an X in one of the side cells, and it gave Maddie a chance to get 3 O's in a row diagonally to win. She made her best triumphant face, marking the line through her 3. I said, holding my hand at arm's length from her. She looked at me from the side, then stood on her chair and was able to reach my hand to complete the high five. "Here you go," she said. I stayed in the laundry room until Maddie's clothes were washed and folded. I offered to give her a ride home, but she said she couldn't agree because it was Mom's rules. "Mom is a smart woman. I'd like to meet her sometime," I said. "Well, maybe someday. She doesn't go out too much," Maddie replied. We continued to communicate with Maddie as winter turned into spring and spring into summer. I started packing a small bag with sandwiches for both of us and snacks, and I bought soda at the laundry. At this time of the morning, I didn't feel like eating, but I thought if I ate a sandwich, she would eat it too, and she was terribly thin. Then I started packing an extra sandwich, telling her she could take the extra one home for her mother. She didn't protest at all and always thanked me. By this time, she told me that she was really 7 years old, and in the fall, she would become a second grader at an elementary school in our district. My father wasn't at home, and in fact, Maddie told me that she had never met her father. Her mother obviously worked outside the house while Maddie went to school, and although she didn't know what her mother was doing, she was always at home by the time Maddie came home from school. Most often, he and his mother stayed in their apartment, sometimes went to the park when the weather was good. They mostly watched TV, and Maddie was familiar with almost all the latest animated films that were shown on children's channels. I couldn't name one of them. There didn't seem to be any money for additional services, but the mother sometimes went on dates on Saturday nights, leaving Maddie after dinner, with instructions to go to bed at 9 p.m. on Sunday morning. Her mother would wake her up, give her money for one washing machine and one dryer, and send her with a cart to the laundry room. To tell the truth, my life at that point wasn't much better than Maddie's, although at least I had enough money to live on. With alimony, mortgage payments, and alimony, my salary as a lead programmer didn't leave much money for additional entertainment, usually for a casual evening at a bar with friends. I didn't go on dates at all. I didn't miss it. However, I missed my children. At least until I remembered how they treated me after Tracy and I broke up. I preferred to think of happier times with them, but reality always bounced and bit me. "Where the hell are you?" Tracy screamed when I picked up the phone at my house the morning after I left Robert Goldstein's lake house. My phone showed that it was 10:06. As far as I could remember, it was already 2:13 when I downed another portion of Eagle Rare bourbon. I must have staggered to my bedroom eventually and fallen asleep. "You left me to my fate in the house by the lake. How do I get home?" She was shouting at me again. "Fuck you. Let Robert Goldstein III take you home." I hung up while she was shouting something else. Damn, you can't hang up on a mobile phone as abruptly as with a landline. In the old days, I would have definitely smashed the phone against the wall by throwing it at it. The following Sunday, Maddie showed up at the laundry 15 minutes later than usual and without her bag of clothes. Tears were streaming down her young face, and I thought she must have been robbed. She was carrying her bear cub, clutching it under her right arm. "Mom didn't come home last night, and I don't have money for washing machines," she said as I approached. "Does she sometimes not come home?" I asked as gently as I could. She shook her head negatively, her big brown eyes glistening with tears. "Mom always comes home. This is another one of her rules." I calmed her down and gave her the food I had brought with me for her. I was in another territory and didn't know what to do. "Is there anyone you can stay with until your mom gets home?" I asked. She shook her head again, this time with a mouthful of peanut butter and jelly. I knew I couldn't leave her alone in the apartment, but if I called the police without a plan, they would undoubtedly send her to foster care during the day, and maybe take her away from her mother forever if they felt she wasn't taking good enough care of the child, which I already had doubts. "How about we go to your apartment and leave your mom a note saying that we're in my apartment? She can call me when she gets home, and I'll bring you to her." I saw her wheels spin. It was a violation of one of her mother's rules, but since her mom didn't come home, I don't think she wanted to spend the day alone in her apartment. She finally nodded in agreement. After packing my things and putting them in the car, we went first to her apartment. We didn't collect anything at Maddie's apartment because there was just nothing to collect. The few pieces of clothing she had either already put on, or they were lying among the dirty clothes waiting for their turn in the laundry. I told her we'd stop somewhere and I'd buy her a few things, including a new toothbrush and comb. She smiled sadly. I left a note with my name and phone number in the middle of the small kitchen table, then we went to get things for Maddie. I let her pick out a few tops and pairs of jeans, as well as underwear and socks at a nearby Dollar General store. While she seemed completely ecstatic, I was trying to figure out what I should do if her mom didn't come back quickly. We watched cartoons and the Disney Channel. I cooked lunch and dinner for us, and at 9 o'clock I put her to sleep in the spare room, on the couch. I planned to call work the next day and take a personal day to sort out some things. Maddie and I waited until lunch to return to her apartment on Monday, but there was no sign that anyone had been there, after the two of us the day before. I rummaged around the apartment a bit and found a drawer in her mother's dresser which contained papers. Among the things found was Maddie's birth certificate, which, as I noticed, did not contain the father's name. Her mother's name was Fiona Ruiz. I took the birth certificate along with a photo of Maddie and her mother. The photo was probably taken when Maddie was about 2 years old. She looked a little more than a child. They were hugging in front of the camera. Fiona looked to be in her mid-20s, and she had the same long, curly brown hair as Maddie. Both were smiling in the picture, and although Fiona was a beautiful woman, her eyes still looked tired and sad. I wondered if that look had grown over the last few years. Maddie watched as I carefully sorted through her mother's things. I tried to have a light conversation with her and explained that I was looking for something that could help us find her mother. She seemed to accept it. When we returned to my apartment, I turned on the TV on the Disney Channel and sat Maddie down, then went to my bedroom, called the police, and reported Fiona Ruiz missing. I had nothing to say to the officer who took the call. Mostly I was talking about how something had to happen to her in order for her to leave her child alone. "Is the child alone in the apartment now, sir?" the officer asked. "No, she's with me. I am the closest friend to a child. I'll be happy to keep her with me until everything is resolved. If you agree to do this until the custody service contacts you, I will be very grateful to you." I was worried that Maddie would end up in foster care somewhere. None of my friends who were in foster care spoke well of this system. I knew that I could do everything right if I was allowed to keep her. While I was thinking about it, from somewhere deep in my brain, I remembered that my boss's wife, Darlene, has influential friends in the social services industry. Maybe I can bargain for a favor. I would like to think that my boss and I were on good terms. I worked for him for 20 years and did a damn good job for his company. We always got along well on a personal level, and he and his wife were by my side during the divorce. Darlene Luster showed up at my apartment about 20 minutes after my conversation with her husband. She said she wanted to make a new friend. I introduced her to Maddie, and like a Pied Piper, Darlene charmed the girl in 5 minutes, and vice versa. When she left about an hour later, I hugged her and got a promise that she would do everything in her power to keep Maddie with me. Later that day, 2 police officers came to my apartment. They didn't have much hope of finding Fiona Ruiz. I gave them a copy of the photo of Maddie and her mom. On Tuesday, I returned to work, took Maddie with me, and enrolled her in our company's kindergarten. Darlene helped create it about 15 years ago. I never used it for my kids because Tracy was a stay-at-home mom until the kids couldn't take care of themselves after school. But for me, playing a single dad, it was a godsend. At least until school started, I took Maddie to work with me in the morning, had lunch with her at noon, and took her home in the evening. Overall, it was a pretty nice scheme. Having Maddie with me helped me get over the fact that my own children abandoned me. I rarely saw them, and when I did, I usually just had dinner at a local restaurant. I didn't take Maddie with me when I met my kids, leaving her with a neighbor, Mrs. Olivares. They didn't need to show her their attitude towards me. Maddie was a breath of fresh air to me. Due to lack of funds, she and Mom didn't do much outside of their home, so a lot of what I did with Maddie was a new experience for her. The first time we went to a real restaurant and not to some McDonald's, she was mesmerized, like a person who had just arrived from another planet. When we went to the park and stopped to eat a pretzel and drink a soda after she played on the playground, you'd think I'd invited her to tea. I think she smiled for a week after the first time. I know that I smiled for a week after that, just listening to her exclaim about her impressions. She started teaching me Spanish. Obviously, she was bilingual and laughed a lot when I confused words and phrases. One day at McDonald's, I ordered horse meat and Coke, and she laughed so hard she started crying. In her innocence, it never occurred to her that most people don't speak 2 languages. I left her at the same school she went to in 1st grade because it was the easiest thing for the school system. I had her birth certificate, so they didn't ask many questions when I entered myself as her contact person and my apartment as her address. I still haven't received a response from the police about Maddie's mother, or from social security agencies who would like to place Maddie in foster care. Darlene must have twisted someone's arms for me, or the city authorities just decided they had too many outstanding cases to worry about Maddie and me. My cooking skills also improved because when Maddie stayed with me, pizza and beer were unacceptable food. So we started watching cooking shows on the Food Channel and cooked in the kitchen together. It's something I've never done with my kids because Tracy was a great cook, I have to admit. But with my Maddie's help, I was learning and getting better, and we had a lot of fun in the kitchen. I'm not going to lie and say that everything was perfect between us. We had quarrels and problems like any other family, but it was just like any other family. We've been together for a little over a year, and Maddie and I have grown into our own version of a family. And this was pointed out to me at Maddie's school, at the beginning of the 3rd grade. One evening, we were at the school's open house and were walking down the hallway when one of Maddie's friends and her parents came over to say hello. Maddie's friend introduced her parents as my mom and dad, and then Maddie introduced me as her dad. I didn't even think about our family in such terms, and when she called me her dad, I almost fainted from the incredible joy of hearing these words. I choked for a second, my vision blurred, and I had to apologize to the Reynolds for my momentary silence, saying that I had a piece of snack stuck in my throat. Maddie realized this, looked at me askance, and squeezed my hand. She never called me Alex again, and nothing could please me more. I had so much fun being a parent again that I didn't even notice that I hadn't dated a woman in over 2 years when Maddie brought it up one day at the grocery store. We were walking up and down the aisles, filling a cart with products from our shopping list, when in the grocery department, we passed a short woman. I didn't think anything of it, but Maddie looked at the woman twice as we passed her. "Wow, Dad, this is a really beautiful woman. You should ask her out," Maddie said. I was looking through the shopping list when she made this statement, so I immediately stopped the cart and looked closely at the woman we had just passed. She was beautiful, and then she looked up at me, and we smiled shyly at each other. "Well, aren't you going to tell her something, Dad?" Maddie asked, looking at us. At that moment, I wanted the floor to swallow me up, but what the hell, maybe a woman would give Maddie and me a pass, so I tried the old way. "Hello, I'm Alex. This is Maddie. As you just heard, Maddie thinks I should ask you out or something," I stuttered. "What do you think?" "What is it?" she asked, looking me straight in the eye and giving me $1 million smile. I was completely smitten. Caramel-colored skin, beautiful white teeth, a smile that can melt ice, and my heart. She looked to be about 158 cm, 50 kg, maybe 35 years old, and although she was wearing a light jacket, she seemed to have curves in the right places and fit well in jeans. There was no ring on her left hand. I quickly wondered if Maddie had noticed this. "Would you like to have dinner with us sometime tonight?" "All together, or just you and me if you prefer." "Muy suavemente, Romeo," Maddie teasingly said in Spanish. "It was a good move to ask your daughter to look for single women in the grocery store for you," the woman replied while I was blushing. "No, to be honest, it wasn't my idea. I would never do that. Honestly." "Yes, that's right, Romeo. I'm buying this. No, but yes, I would like that. Have dinner with both of you. By the way, I'm Cherry Roberts." "Really? Was it that simple?" "Damn, I should have used that image a long time ago," I said, and she and I giggled. "We have an appointment for next Saturday. She said she loves Italian cuisine and Maddie and I have some good recipes." After we exchanged phone numbers and I gave her my address, Maddie and I turned around to continue shopping. Maddie and I punched each other as we turned the corner to the aisle. "Yes, no setup for sure," she called after us. Finally, the following Saturday came. I swear the days couldn't have gone any slower. After cleaning the apartment, Maddie and I started cooking homemade lasagna, garlic breadsticks and salad, and homemade tortoni for dessert. Cooking calmed my nerves because, to tell the truth, I was nervous as a naughty cat. After all, it's been over 20 years since my last date. And then it hit me, abruptly. It's been 20 years since my last date. Of course, all these last dates were with Tracy, and I had to think hard to remember who I dated before Tracy and I got together. I think it could have been Marianne Rizzo. The last time I heard about her, she married the next guy she dated after me. I was wondering if they were still married, or if her marriage had gone in the same direction as mine. "Calm down, man," I finally said to myself. "It's a date, just a damn date, and you're already thinking about marriage." I wasn't the only one who seemed ready for this. Maddie looked excited too. She was by my side, helping me while we cleaned and then cooked. I didn't realize it, but Cherry was the first visitor to our apartment who wasn't Mrs. Olivares or was older than about 10 years. Dinner went well, it seemed to me. It was a little nervous at first, but the presence of an 8-year-old child is a great icebreaker. My mom wasn't married either. Have you ever been married, Cherry? "What is it?" she asked when I brought Cherry a glass of Galliano shortly after she arrived. Cherry blushed almost as much as I did at the question. Then she looked Maddie straight in the eye and said softly, "I used to be married to a wonderful man, baby, but that was in the past." I saw sadness and then pain reflected on her face as she answered the question. "Dad was married too, and he has 2 other children besides me," Maddie continued. At that point, I decided it was better for me to tell Cherry briefly about my marriage and divorce and how I became Maddie's father. She took it all calmly, with a stoic expression on her face. She and Maddie both looked a little teary-eyed when I got to the part about Maddie's mother not coming home. However, the sadness passed quickly for Maddie, who then asked Cherry about her name. "That's a great name, Cherry. I'm sure your parents were funny when you were a kid." "Well, it's a pretty funny story, baby," Cherry replied. "Actually, my real name is Marcella, and for short my name was Sella. One day in the grocery store, my younger brother saw a box of cherries and Sella chocolate, and after that he started calling me Cherry. It stuck, and now everyone calls me that, so I'm called that too." "Well, it suits you a lot better than Marcella," I interjected. "I see thick, dark, rimmed glasses, masculine hands, and a sturdy ass." "Ooh, that's harsh," Cherry replied with a giggle. "You will never ever call me by my first name." Cherry stayed with us until it was time for Maddie to go to bed at 9. Then she said she had to go too. I hoped she wasn't just being polite when she said she had a good time and that next time we should do it at her apartment. I gave her a quick peck on the lips as she walked out the door. For a brief second, I thought I could smell arousal, but so much time had passed that maybe I was just dreaming. "I like her, Dad. I think she'll do for us," Maddie said after I closed the door. I had to admit, at least to myself, that the child was right. For now. We had family date nights 5 Saturdays in a row, and I think we all had a good time. However, I knew that I needed to try to meet one-on-one to see if this had a chance to get anywhere. Maddie took the news well when I told her that I was inviting Cherry to a restaurant, just the two of us, and that she would spend the evening with Mrs. Olivares. Of course, I wasn't going to leave Maddie at home alone like her mother did. I would never criticize Maddie's mom, but I wasn't going to leave an 8-year-old at home alone while I was going on a date. Besides, I think both Maddie and I were well aware that the last time she was left alone at home, things didn't turn out very well. I booked a table at a nice steakhouse for our first one-on-one date, as Maddie called it. I knew the mood would definitely be different when I showed up at Cherry's door to pick her up. She was wearing a somewhat form-fitting silk dress, open at the front so that her voluptuous 36S were clearly visible, and short enough to make her slender legs seem a little longer. She was wearing a little more makeup than usual, and was wearing a different perfume, something more spicy but not too strong. Damn, I completely forgot to take my stick. How the hell am I going to fight off all the other men? If you think that this silver tongue will help you achieve anything, well, maybe you're right, she laughed back. We had a great dinner and had a nice conversation on more adult topics without Maddie, although it was a little strange that she wasn't with me. "You miss her now, don't you?" Cherry suddenly asked, looking straight into my eyes. "Sort of," I admitted. "Except for school and work, we are always together, and I don't mind a bit." "You really miss the first two, don't you?" "What is it?" she asked. "It's terrible, although not with the attitude that appeared after I left. I know they're still kids, but they don't even try to look at things from my point of view. My ex really turned them against me." "It seems to me that you get along well with children," I continued. "If you don't mind me asking, why haven't you ever had children?" "No, I don't mind. We were considering this issue at a time when I made the absolutely stupidest decision of my life. I disrespected and cheated on my husband, and all for the thrill. I was a stupid, stupid fool and ripped out the heart of the only person who was dear to me more than anything in the world. It's a mistake I'll never make again if I get another chance to love someone like that." Cherry's voice trailed off as she said the last part, but I caught every word she said in a barely audible whisper. Her eyes filled with tears, which she tried unsuccessfully to wipe away. I handed her my napkin, and she gently dabbed at her eyes. "I'm sorry if I made you go where you didn't want to go," I said. "I've never talked to anyone about this before," she said. "Even with my parents. I'm too ashamed of myself." "Then enough adult talk," I said. "Let's score this joint and see if you have any moves on the dance floor, Missy." "Missy? How old do you think I am, 12? Actually, I thought you were 35, but I'm 44, so to me you're just a kid," I said. "Really, 35? She was delighted. "I'm 42. I was married for 12 years, divorced for 9 years. You are very useful for a girl's self-esteem, sir. Can't it be that you're only 2 years younger than me?" "I look like I can be practically your older brother," I laughed. I paid the bill and we went to the dance club that Tracy and I sometimes attended. I'm not Fred Astaire, but Tracy loved going to dances, so one of the first things I did when we had extra money was take some dancing lessons. I quickly realized that sitting on the sidelines and watching your wife dance with other men is not the most pleasant thing to do. Cherry was as light on her feet as she looked. We danced to slow and fast music for about 30 minutes before I needed a break. Cherry looked like she could have continued, but she left the floor with me and we found an empty table. I went to the bar, and before I could move away from the table, the first vulture flew at him. I watched what was happening from the corners of my eyes, trying not to seem too noticeable. I saw Cherry smiling and laughing. The vulture must have been a little funny, but she didn't move away from the table. I was more than satisfied. She sucked on her margarita when I handed it to her. Very soon, vulture number 2 arrived, a guy about 25 years old. He acknowledged my presence, but still turned to Cherry and asked if she wanted to dance. Sorry, Slick, but the lady is with me. I don't really like being disrespected, especially by children. I spoke softly but firmly, keeping a smile on my face. I know there was no smile in my eyes, although obviously the guy knew he had violated protocol. Sorry, dude. I didn't know you two were a couple, he whimpered before slipping away. We finished our drinks and returned to the dance floor, staying there for about 30 more minutes. Another guy tried to cut in, but at least he had the sense to ask me first. When I told him no, he took it normally, held out his hand and said, "You shouldn't blame a person for trying. She's great." We went back to the table and both had another glass. Just as we were finishing, another vulture swooped in and asked me for permission to dance with Cherry. I was tired, but I decided that if she still wanted to dance, then I would let her go out. She shook her head and I told him the bad news. I drove her home and she invited me to come in for a while. It was only 22:30 and I agreed. We drank a glass of wine and talked easily for another hour. At that moment I stood up and she stood up with me. I didn't know how to end the date, and I must have looked like the proverbial deer in the headlights because she giggled, which I really liked. I blushed a lot, and she realized that I was in big trouble. "Don't worry, Alex, we're not in a hurry, are we?" As if she cooed. 2 weeks later, in my bedroom, I interrupted my series of 0 inches for 2 years. It wasn't something wild and crazy because Maddie was sleeping in the next room, but I can't tell you how nice it was to get relief from her. I didn't last long, but Cherry seemed fine with that because before I got mine, I made sure she got hers 4 times, twice with her fingers and twice with her mouth. Tracy always said I was a world-class pussy eater and, well, it's like riding a bike, you just don't forget. I didn't use her ass, but I spent a lot of time gnawing on her wonderful brown ass. I left some mouth prints so she could admire them when she gets dressed over the next few days. Although it wasn't part of the evening's plans, Cherry spent the night in my bed, cuddling up to my arm and chest. When we both got up for breakfast, she went to my closet and came out in a white shirt that covered the essentials, but at the same time looked incredibly beautiful. We went to the kitchen, where we were soon joined by Maddie, who let out a squeal when she saw that Cherry was still with us. She ran up to her and threw herself into Cherry's arms, almost knocking her down. They hugged tightly, and both seemed genuinely happy to be in each other's arms. It was almost ridiculously gentle, and I rolled my eyes at the couple. "Pancakes, pancakes," they both shouted in unison. "Pancakes with chocolate chips," I shouted back. 6 months later, Cherry moved in with us permanently, and we became the 21st century version of the Brady Gang. Despite the fact that I still paid alimony and child support, I earned a decent living, and Cherry worked in an accounting firm and also earned a decent living. Maddie didn't lack for much, even though she didn't ask for much. I think when you grow up without a lot, almost everything can be perceived as a lot. I think everything is relative. And while we might have been a modern version of the Brady Gang, I think we looked like a modern version of the Odd Couple, in this case, the Odd Trio. We were black, white, and Hispanic, and each of us had our own last name. Some of these problems were solved when I enrolled Maddie in the 4th grade in the fall. I listed her name as Maddie Ruiz Rogers. She was with me when I checked her in, and her eyes got big when she saw what I wrote. She didn't say anything until we left school, then she practically exploded. "Can I be Rogers? Like you?" "Really?" she screamed. "Not exactly legally, at least for a few more years," I replied. "But according to the Rogers rules, you have the right to join the club." I made air quotes at the word Rogers rules, but that didn't stop Maddie at all. She jumped into my arms and started kissing me on the cheeks. After 30 seconds of celebration, Maddie pulled back and gave me a cold look. I was a little taken aback until she spoke up. "When will Cherry be able to become Rogers?" "What is it?" she asked. "You know, this is a very good question. I'll have to think about it seriously," and I seriously thought about it. Actually, on the anniversary of our first date, I asked Maddie to stay with Mrs. Olivares, and after work I went to the jeweler from whom I bought gifts for Tracy. Cherry said she'd be home late and would have dinner by herself, so I figured I'd have a couple of hours to find a suitable ring. It was a little over 6 when I left Jean Horowitz Jewelers, having just designed a custom engagement ring with Jean's daughter, Jolene. After ordering pizza for Maddie, Mrs. Olivares, and me, I drove to my favorite pizzeria in a small shopping mall. Just as I was about to get out of the car, I glanced at a small but fashionable eatery located just a few minutes away, and at that moment, my world ended for the second time. My Cherry walked into the restaurant, holding the hand of a 40-year-old handsome black guy. She looked lively and very happy. I stared after them, unable to move, or take a breath, or think about it. I don't know how long I sat in the car before I realized that I hadn't been breathing for some time, and felt like I was about to lose consciousness. I took a deep breath, then another. Then I decided I needed to feed Maddie, so I went into the pizzeria and ordered. I was driving home in a stupor. I don't remember much about the evening, at least not until Cherry got home around 8. She was still lively and seemed to be in a great mood when she walked through the door. "Hello." "You'll never guess who I ran into tonight. My brother John snuck into town without telling me, and after I finished work, he invited me to dinner. I thought since you guys are eating pizza, I could have a snack with him." She stopped talking when she saw the look on my face. "Is this the story you made up?" I asked quietly. Cherry looked startled as the reality of what I said was replayed in her brain. "You went to Salvatore's for pizza tonight, and you saw me with him, didn't you? And you thought—" "You are a beast," she yelled at me. I was more than a little surprised. I expected guilt here, and remorse, not attacks. This must be some new way to apologize, I thought to myself. Cherry had never swore at me before, but I was beginning to realize that she might have good reasons. "You don't even trust me enough to give me credit, you bastard. I know that I lost my husband because I cheated on him. I've told you all about it. I didn't hide anything, and I told you that I would never make that mistake again. I understand that your ex-wife left you with trust issues, but that's your problem with her. Don't you dare treat me so disrespectfully anymore, or I'll leave here so fast that your head will spin." Mrs. Olivares apparently calmly left when Cherry exploded, and I saw Maddie slip into her room. I wished that the sofa I was sitting on would swallow me up, but I was unlucky. "You're right," I said softly. "I let the distrust that Tracy planted in my head spread to you. You are a separate entity, and if I can't see it, then it's my fault, and I don't deserve you. I wasn't going to tell her about the ring yet, but after I screwed up like that, I had to play my best card." She bared her teeth. "If looks could kill, I don't think I'd be walking the earth by now. So, I know now is probably not the right time for this, but I have to show you how much I value you. Give me your left hand." She slowly came up to me and held out her hand, palm up. I turned her palm down, put a piece of paper on her ring finger, and secured it with an elastic band from my shirt pocket. She looked, to put it mildly, puzzled. "What the?" she said, taking the paper off her finger, unfolding it, and starting to read. "You're a lousy asshole," she screamed. "Really?" Then Cherry bit into my lips with the most passionate kiss I've ever received, including everything Tracy has ever done. When we were done, she called Maddie to come out of her room. "Look, baby, look," she said to Maddie, handing over the receipt for the ring. "I'm going to be Rogers too." The shrieking laughter of a pair of joyful females sounds at too high a level for comfortable perception by males, but I managed to keep my hearing while they jumped around the room. When they parted, Cherry pressed a button on her mobile phone and exclaimed loudly, "You'd better come here and meet your future son, in-law." Maddie went and returned Mrs. Olivares so Cherry could show off her ring, and it was still Christmas morning in the apartment when Cherry's brother showed up. He was as handsome as a man as Cherry was beautiful as a woman. Looking at him again, I couldn't even begin to thank him for being her brother, and not the boyfriend I thought he was. We shook hands when Cherry introduced us, but then he reached forward and grabbed me in a bear hug. "A handshake is for friends, and while I want us to be friends, a hug is for family," he said. "And they also have to show you that if you hurt her, I'll beat the life out of you." "Understood." He squeezed his hand a little harder as he said the last part. I wasn't breathing very well, and I got the point. "Yeah," I whispered back to him. Cherry briefly told him about what happened before I gave her the ring. He looked at me with mock surprise, I think, and said he was glad I was still alive. She was looking at you with a laser death stare, wasn't she? John asked. Yes, she killed people with that look. Maddie and Mrs. Olivares noted that they had the sense to leave the room when they saw that look. Then he turned to Maddie, looked her up and down, and said, "So this is the famous Maddie Rogers. I've always wanted to have nephews and nieces. I think you'd be great." Maddie smiled shyly, and then her face lit up like a sunny day. "Does this mean that I can call you Mom?" she asked Cherry. Cherry didn't answer because she burst into tears. She reached out to Maddie and they stood in each other's arms for a long time, each crying their own tears for their own reasons. Even with Darlene's help, the state made us wait until Maddie turned 16 so we could legally adopt her. At that time, she could have already applied for emancipation and gone into independent life, but neither Cherry nor I were worried that this would happen. The state only sanctioned what Maddie, Cherry, and I created many years ago. Family is not always blood, and legal documents. And then, out of the blue, I haven't heard a word from either of my children since we last met over 6 years ago, so I was more than a little surprised when Haley was on the other end of the line. I didn't look at the caller ID and just answered in my usual way. "Alex Rogers." "Dad, it's me, Haley," she said quickly. "Please don't hang up on me." "Relax, baby. I would never hang up on you or your brother." "Something happened?" "No, Dad, it's all good. It's just wonderful. I'm getting married next month and I'd like to invite you to the wedding." I think I was as shocked as everyone else. She was my little girl, and yet I was so detached from her life that I didn't even know the man she was going to marry in just a month. It was just after Ethan's 16th birthday, the last time I talked to my kids. We went to Ethan's favorite restaurant for his birthday. As usual, none of the children were very talkative, despite my repeated attempts. Finally, right after we ordered dessert, Ethan said, "Dad, I'm already 16 and the court-ordered dates are over. Haley and I don't have to see you anymore if we don't want to. And we've discussed everything. And we don't want to see you. You left us to save your stupid pride. Well, you can take your pride and shove it up your ass." I had to pay tribute to my son. He was a great customer. Although he couldn't look me in the eye when talking to me, he never raised his voice. For her part, Haley continued to look from Ethan to me and back again. I inhaled, expecting it to happen one day. It was Tracy's handiwork. Her fingerprints were all over it. "I assume that you understand what wedding vows are, and that your mother not only broke ours, but also threw them in my face. But she's obviously convinced you both that I'm the bad guy here, and nothing I say will change your mind. But for me, breaking our wedding vows is not something I can just ignore, like, say, the breakdown of the family car. It's right in my soul, and even though I knew my leaving would hurt you two, my staying would be even worse because it would crush my soul and make me less than the person I am. Then we wouldn't be the same, and you'd realize that when you grew up and lived long enough to see things for what they really are. It was your mother's mistake, and she did a good job of putting the blame on me. Well, I won't accept the blame. If that's what you both want—" Dad, Haley said, bringing me back to the present. "Don't you want to go?" "I really want to, Haley, baby. You know, I even saved money for the day when it happens," I replied. "You don't have to worry about money, Dad. Bob took care of it." "Bob?" I asked. "I suppose, but we're talking about Robert Goldstein III, aren't we?" There was a note of annoyance in her voice, then it turned to pity. "You didn't know then, apparently. Mom married Bob about 6 years ago after we stopped seeing each other," she said. "So this bastard ruined my marriage, ruined my relationship with my children, half ruined me financially, and then married my ex-wife. Is this all because of my pride, Haley? Every time my son demands an apology from me, don't be like that, Dad. I'm not inviting you here to cause problems. You will not betray me. You will not sit in front with your family. I just want you to be there, okay? All right, Haley, on one small condition, that I can bring my family with me." "Your family?" "Yes, even a loser like me has a family, Haley. I have a wonderful wife and we have an amazing daughter. You'll like them both if you ever spend any time with them." It was Haley's turn to get lost in thought. I never told her or Ethan about Cherry and Maddie. To be honest, I didn't want their mother to know. "Do you have another child? Does she know about me and Ethan?" "What is it?" she asked, almost as if in a trance. "Maddie is 16. She's adopted. We've been together for 9 years now. I almost literally found her on the street. She knows everything about you two, what we once had, and what we don't have anymore. She is cheerful and full of life. She had a setback too, and we were next to each other, at a very bad time in our lives, almost like a script. Well, then I'm looking forward to meeting the rest of the family, Haley said, recovering from the shock. The wedding took place on Saturday evening, in a rather posh setting, as befits the daughter of a fairly successful lawyer. To give old Bob his due, he didn't skimp on his stepdaughter. The service itself took place in a beautiful old church in the city. The girls and I timed it so that we got there right before the service and sat in the last row. Yes, I noticed old friends and relatives, but the fact that we came right before the service meant that we didn't have to communicate ahead of time. And when Haley and Mark were leading the procession out of the church, I got a kiss in my direction. We arrived at the reception just in time to get a table at the back of the room, which, to tell the truth, was unfair to Cherry and Maddie, who had a girls' spa day on Friday and then both bought new dresses. Cherry's was exquisite, and Maddie looked 16 and 21 when she first applied full makeup, any father's nightmare. But they both respected my wishes and didn't complain when we sat down at the table after I went into the bar to get a glass of wine for Cherry and me and a Coke for Maddie. As I expected, various friends from the old days began to drop by the table to say hello and chat as soon as they noticed me. Then Tracy's parents, Rhonda and William, came over. Rhonda burst into tears as soon as she bent down to kiss me. William hugged me harder than when Tracy and I were married. I introduced Cherry and Maddie. Both Rhonda and Bill looked a little awkward, but I figured it was understandable. I'd been married to their daughter for 18 years. Since I didn't have the right to vote and didn't pay for this case, I didn't think it would be right for me to move around and work with the crowd, so to speak. So the girls and I mostly stayed at the table when people came up to us. But I'm not a fool, and I could see the reaction of many people who knew me that I was with a gorgeous black woman and a Spanish-speaking princess. In particular, the reaction of the wives of former friends. You'd think I'd brought a trophy wife to the party. And just at that moment, Tracy and Bob, our congenial hosts, appeared. Being married to someone for almost 20 years, you delve into all the nuances of someone's personality, and from the first moment Tracy saw Cherry, I knew she didn't like her. Maybe Cherry was too black? Maybe. Maybe Cherry was too beautiful. Most likely. Could Cherry have a flat stomach, beautiful legs, and look 10 years younger than her age? Definitely. Could Cherry, with all that she had, just be with the one wrong guy in the room? Yes, damn it. For all that was going on in her head about Cherry, Tracy didn't even pay much attention to the fact that this was the first time in the last 10 years that we saw each other up close. She almost literally woke up when I came up and kissed her on the cheek as a greeting. "Oh, Alex, I'm sorry. I had a little trouble getting around in these new heels," she apologized. "No problem, baby. You look amazing," I lied. "Come on, meet my new family." I introduced Cherry, Maddie, Tracy, and Bob, shook Bob's hand as warmly as I could, introducing him to them as an instrument of my subsequent good fortune. Everyone except Maddie winced when I said that, but my daughter gave me a sly look and squeezed my left elbow. Did I tell you that this kid is perceptive? We chatted for about 5 minutes, not really saying anything, until Tracy and Bob left, and the bride and her new husband came over. When Tracy and Bob walked away, Maddie shook her head slightly, which indicated that she wasn't any more excited about meeting them than I was about introducing them. My second daughter, the bride, greeted me much more warmly than I expected. She hugged me and started crying, while my new son-in-law Cherry and Maddie stood in silence. I was completely stunned by this and didn't know what to say when she finally let me go. "I'm sorry, Dad, for everything," she croaked. "I never understood what you were getting at until I repeated my own vow about 2 hours ago. Right during the recitation of the oath, I was struck like a blow in the face by what you went through when your mother cheated on you and broke the oath. I never understood. I blamed you and your damn pride, just like Ethan. And now I understand. Completely. You were absolutely right when you did what you did, and she was absolutely wrong when she not only did what she did, but also put the blame on you. How can I compensate for the pain that Ethan and I have caused you? There was a lump in my throat the size of a football. I haven't cried since I tore cartilage in my knee playing football in 10th grade, but I was damn close to it standing here with the family gathered around. How about you introduce me to this handsome stallion you swore an oath to first, and then do me the honor of dancing?" I replied. "Oh yes, of course," she said, somewhat embarrassed. "You haven't met the man of my dreams yet. Mark Westinghouse. Meet your second father-in-law, Alex Rogers, my real father." We shook hands sincerely. And then I fulfilled my duty as a father and threatened him with my life if he ever offended my daughter. I introduced him to both Haley, Cherry, and Maddie, and while everyone was getting to know each other, the orchestra started playing. "Dad?" Haley asked, tilting her head towards the dance floor. "I'm mesmerized," I said, taking her hand. The crowd, which started buzzing louder when Haley greeted me, buzzed even louder when I led Haley onto the dance floor. I knew that at this point I started to resemble Tracy and Bob, but I had many years to catch up. The band played what I like to call children's music, and although I hate it, I knew how to dance to it, thanks to being married to a goddess who loves to dance. Haley was shocked that her newfound father was such a Renaissance man, and we actually lasted 2 songs. By then, most of the crowd had gathered around the 2 of us. When the second song ended, Haley hugged me tightly once more, the crowd applauded, and Cherry and Maddie were waiting for me with bright smiles on their faces. I grabbed their hands and pulled them both to the floor with me, and the 3 of us did our thing while everyone else joined us. "Well, look at you, Mr. Rhythm," Cherry said in my ear as she came closer. "Who would have thought that marrying off a daughter could be so much fun?" I told her, turning quickly to Maddie. "Well, let's wait a few more years. I'm not sure my heart can handle all this fun." "Turn me on, old man," Maddie smiled back. All 3 of us stayed on the floor for 6 more songs. Then I left my girls, went to the bar for a Jack on the Rocks, and sat down at my table to relax. I was watching Cherry and Maddie enjoying themselves completely on the dance floor, and I didn't notice Tracy coming over and sitting next to me at the table. She touched my shoulder, and I instantly realized whose touch it was. "This was supposed to be our day, not mine and Bob's," Tracy said, leaning into my ear. "You threw away 18 good years. For what? You obviously didn't love me enough." I didn't turn my head in her direction. "No, you obviously didn't love me enough not to do it at all, especially after I told you what would happen if you did. You didn't love me enough and you didn't respect me enough. But hey, you got Bob as a result of the deal, and he's a pretty good catch, I'd say. And I got Cherry and Maddie. To quote the Rolling Stones, you can't always get what you want, but if you try, sometimes you can find what you need. You were an asshole then. You're an asshole now." "Maybe, but I'm a lucky asshole who didn't lose a minute of sleep because of your bad decision. And no, I didn't expect an apology. I'm fine. Ethan came back into my life when he started a serious relationship with a woman a few years ago. It seems that loyalty is much easier to understand when you have, so to speak, your own skin in the game. He called me unexpectedly and said that we needed to talk, and I invited him to the apartment. He was carrying a bottle of Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey when I opened the door. Haley said that you really like this drink, and she decided that I should make a peaceful sacrifice for you, he said when I brought him into the apartment. We only talked a little bit at Haley's wedding, and then at best on shaky ground. It was more than 2 years ago, and although Haley and I reconciled, Ethan and I at that time had not yet reconciled. So I asked my girlfriend Sasha to become my wife, and it made me think about you and Mom. Haley has been telling me for several years that you were the injured party in this case, not Mom, but I really didn't see it until Sasha and I had a big talk that included our feelings about loyalty. I'm sorry, Dad, I was a complete idiot. Now I understand everything. I just didn't want to hate my mom. I never asked you and Haley to choose sides, I replied. I just wanted you to know why I had to leave. I had to leave. Over the next few hours, Ethan and I discussed a lot over a bottle of whiskey. Cherry cooked a great dinner for all of us when the 4 of us were catching up. Ethan ended up sleeping on the couch in the living room because Cherry wouldn't let him drive her car after he shared a bottle of booze with me. Cherry, Maddie, and I sat at the groom's family table at this wedding, along with pregnant Haley and Mark and our first grandson, 2-year-old Brent, who sat next to Tracy. At least it allowed Tracy not to feel left out, since she was now alone, since Bob had thrown her to the sidelines in favor of a trophy wife about a year ago. The children kept me informed of Tracy's affairs from time to time, giving me fragmentary news about her. I told them both that it was unwise to be the link between Tracy and me. We were adults, and if one of us wanted the other to know something, we could pick up the phone. Maddie flew in for the wedding. She's a freshman at the University of Michigan, but she didn't want to miss her older brother's wedding, so I flew in with her. She, Ethan, and Haley have a strong relationship, so much so that they can make fun of her by saying that she is my favorite child. It is very interesting for me to watch them together. The argument that parenting is more important than nature when it comes to parenting seems to suit us, because Maddie and I have an indissoluble bond. which even Cherry noted. Although I wouldn't want what we went through in early childhood to happen to anyone else, adversity has made us a little closer than we could have been. Adversity also probably helped Cherry and me. We both know that nothing can ever be taken for granted, and we cherish the time we spend together while we figure out our new single-parent life. I can tell that it didn't take Cherry long to realize that an empty nest meant that no one in the next room was eavesdropping on anything, and she went all out in the bedroom. Hearing her screams of pleasure, I just go berserk and want to give her even more pleasure. There are mornings when we are both going to work, a little stiff and painful after a stormy night of games. When all the usual wedding chores were completed at the reception, Cherry and I went to the dance floor. Maddie also danced with one of Ethan's groomsmen, but not before Ethan warned them that they should not mess with my father's favorite child. Otherwise, they would face hell. I grinned when he said that. I returned to the table after half a dozen dances, but Maddie wanted to dance with me, so I stayed for one more. I noticed that Cherry and Tracy had nothing to say to each other, despite the fact that they were sitting at a conversation distance. "Do you feel the frost coming from the other side of the room?" Maddie asked when she was within speaking distance. Insightful. When I finally returned to the table, Cherry got up and joined Maddie on the dance floor. After a minute, I felt a touch on my shoulder. Obviously, we've come to the second round, I thought. "Well, aren't you going to gloat about Bob leaving me?" Tracy asked, leaning toward me. "Not my circus, not my monkeys," I replied. "I know this might surprise you, but I rarely think about you at all. I don't want to hurt you, but I don't care about your life and what happens to it. We've had 18 wonderful years, and that was many years ago. I have a new life now, and I don't want to waste time thinking about the past, or about what could have been." While we were talking, I was watching the dance floor, and now I turned to face Tracy, and then I saw her. Fear. The fear that she will retire alone. This was another factor that she obviously hadn't considered all those years ago, because she thought I should back off in the face of her threats to ruin my life in a divorce. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her, but then I realized that she would have tried to crush my soul if the roles had been reversed in this conversation. "You know, I was an asshole then, I'm an asshole now," I said, getting up from the table and joining my girls on the dance floor.